In my hospital room, my sister pulled my monitor cord and said you always fake being sick. But the nurse outside heard everything. She walked in and said, "You are not leaving, I called the police." My sister turned white. My mom begged, but 5 minutes later everything changed forever. I am Aaliyah, 32 years old, and I never thought my own flesh and blood would try to kill me for a payout. Lying in that sterile ICU bed, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only thing anchoring me to reality. I had just survived a complex valve replacement surgery, a condition I had battled since childhood. My chest felt heavy as if a pile of bricks was crushing my lungs, and the anesthesia still fogged my brain. I could not open my eyes, but my hearing was terrifyingly sharp. The heavy door to my room clicked open. I expected the soft rubber-soled footsteps of my favorite nurse, Higgins. Instead, I heard the sharp, arrogant click of designer stilettos against the linoleum floor. I knew that sound anywhere. It was Bianca, my younger sister. At 28, Bianca was everything I was not. Loud, demanding, and obsessed with appearances. She paused by my bedside. I could smell her perfume, a cloying scent of vanilla and expensive despair that she used to mask the smell of alcohol. She did not take my hand. She did not whisper a prayer. Instead, I felt her lean close to my ear. Her breath was warm, but her words were ice cold. Finally, she whispered, "You are such a burden, Aaliyah. Mom is exhausted. Brad is exhausted. We are all tired of your drama." I tried to move my finger to signal that I was awake, but my body refused to obey. I was trapped in a prison of my own flesh. Bianca sighed, a sound of theatrical annoyance. She continued speaking, her voice dropping to a sinister murmur. "You know, Brad looked over Dad's old papers. That life insurance policy you have? The one Dad set up before he died? $5 million, Aaliyah. $5 million. Do you have any idea what that kind of money could do for me? For my brand? For the baby?" My heart rate spiked. I could hear the monitor beep faster. She was talking about my life as if it were a transaction. I was not a sister to her. I was a lottery ticket. Bianca let out a low, bitter laugh. "You always have to be the center of attention with your sickness. Well, let us see if you are faking this time." I felt her hand brush against the equipment stand. The plastic casing of the life support machine rattled. Panic flooded my veins. She was not just venting, she was going to do it. She was going to kill me. "You are worth more dead than alive, sis," she hissed. Then there was a sudden silence. The rhythmic beeping that had been keeping me alive stopped abruptly. A long, high-pitched warning tone began to wail. My chest seized, the air supply from the ventilator cut off. I was suffocating, drowning in dry air, unable to scream, unable to breathe, while my sister stood there and watched me die. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had family who valued money more than your life. Trust me, you will want to see how I made them pay for every single second of this pain. Darkness did not fall slowly. It crashed down on me like a heavy velvet curtain. My lungs, already fragile and healing, spasmed in a desperate attempt to draw breath that simply was not there. The silence of the room was instantly shattered by the shrill, piercing shriek of the cardiac monitor. It was a sound designed to induce panic, a mechanical scream that signaled the end of a life. But through the haze of hypoxia, my eyes fluttered open just a fraction. I saw her. I saw Bianca standing over me, the white power cord dangling from her manicured hand like a dead snake. She did not look horrified. She looked impatient. She was watching the flat line on the screen, waiting for it to become permanent. My chest burned. It felt as if someone had lit a fire inside my rib cage. I tried to lift my arm to grab the bed rail to make any noise at all, but my muscles were paralyzed by the anesthesia and the lack of oxygen. I was drowning on dry land, staring into the face of my own sister, who was counting the seconds until she became an heiress. The corners of my vision began to turn black. I thought this was it. I thought this was how my story ended. Then the door to room 304 exploded inward. It hit the wall with a thunderous crack that made Bianca jump and drop the cord. Nurse Higgins did not walk in. She stormed in like a tactical unit. Higgins was a woman of formidable presence, a veteran head nurse who had run this ICU for 20 years. She had seen everything from miracles to tragedies, and she knew exactly what a code blue looked like. But she also knew what an unplugged machine looked like. In 2 strides, she was at my bedside. She did not waste a single second asking questions. Her hands moved with a blur of professional efficiency. She grabbed the cord from where it had fallen on the floor and slammed it back into the wall socket. She hit the reset button on the ventilator. The machine whirred back to life, and a sudden violent rush of air forced its way into my lungs. I gasped. It was a ragged, painful sound like tearing fabric. My back arched off the mattress as oxygen flooded my starved system. The burning in my chest flared hot and then began to recede, replaced by the cool, rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. I was alive. Nurse Higgins checked my vitals, her eyes scanning the monitor as my heart rate stabilized. Only then did she turn around. The transformation was terrifying. The gentle, caring nurse who had wiped my forehead an hour ago was gone. In her place stood a guardian lioness. She stood between me and Bianca, her broad shoulders blocking my sister's view of the bed. "Do not move," Higgins commanded. Her voice was low, dangerous, and completely devoid of fear. Bianca laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound that grated on the ears. She took a step back, clutching her designer purse. "Oh my God, the plug just fell out. I was trying to put it back in. I was so scared. You need to fix this machine. It is faulty. I am going to sue this hospital." Higgins did not blink. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her radio, never taking her eyes off Bianca. "Security to ICU room 304 immediately. I have a code gray. Attempted harm to a patient. Lock down the floor." Bianca's face went pale. Her fake tan suddenly looked like dirt against her ashen skin. "Excuse me. Who do you think you are talking to? I am Bianca Brooks. My husband is Brad Miller. You cannot call security on me. I am family." Higgins took a step forward, forcing Bianca back toward the window. "Family does not pull the plug on a ventilator," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "I saw the cord in your hand. I saw you watching the monitor flatline. You were not trying to help. You were waiting." I tried to speak, to tell Higgins about the insurance money, but my throat was too raw. I could only watch as my sister realized she was trapped. Bianca looked at the door, then at Higgins. Panic replaced arrogance. She lunged for the handle. Higgins was faster. She slammed her hand against the door, holding it shut. "You are not going anywhere, sweetheart. The police are already on their way. You can explain to them why a hospital-grade plug, which requires 10 pounds of force to remove, just happened to fall out while you were standing right next to it." For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in Bianca's eyes. The alarms were still ringing in the hallway, but inside the room, the only sound was my sister's shallow, terrified breathing and the steady, victorious beep of the monitor she had failed to silence. The double doors swung open with enough force to bang against the wall stoppers. My mother, Beatrice, stood in the frame. She was dressed for a church committee meeting in a pristine, cream-colored suit and pearls, her presence demanding immediate attention. For a split second, a foolish, childish part of me hoped. I hoped she would see her oldest daughter lying pale and gasping against the pillows. I hoped she would see the terror in my eyes. I hoped she would rush to my side and ask if I was still breathing. But hope is a dangerous thing in my family. Beatrice scanned the room, her eyes darting from the revived monitor to Nurse Higgins, and finally landing on Bianca, who was huddled by the window sobbing with the theatrical intensity of a soap opera star. My mother did not even glance at me. She rushed past the foot of my bed, the breeze from her movement chilling my skin, and wrapped her arms around the sister who had just tried to murder me. "Oh, baby, it is okay, Mommy is here," Beatrice cooed, stroking Bianca's hair while glaring at Nurse Higgins. "What on earth is going on here? Why are you treating my daughter like a common criminal?" Nurse Higgins crossed her arms, unimpressed by the display of maternal outrage. Your daughter was caught holding the plug to your other daughter's life support. I suggest you step back, Mrs. Brooks. Security is on the elevator. Beatrice's face twisted into a mask of indignation. She let go of Bianca and marched up to Higgins, wagging a manicured finger in the nurse's face. How dare you! You are going to lose your job for this. You are accusing my Bianca of what exactly? She was trying to help. She told me on the phone that the machine was making a noise. She was trying to fix the loose cord for her sister. I lay there too weak to speak, listening to my mother rewrite reality in real time. It was a skill she had perfected over decades. In Beatrice's world, appearances were everything. Bianca was the golden child, the reflection of her own vanity, and therefore Bianca could do no wrong. If Bianca held a smoking gun, my mother would swear she was just holding it for a friend. That is a lie, Higgins said, her voice steady and calm. The plug does not just fall out, and you do not fix it by standing there watching the patient turn blue. Beatrice scoffed, turning her back on the nurse to look at me for the first time. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or concern. Look what you have caused, Aaliyah. Your sister is in distress because of your faulty equipment. Tell this woman the truth. Tell her Bianca was helping you. The room spun. My own mother was asking me to cover for my killer, while my heart was still struggling to find its rhythm. She did not ask how I felt. She did not check the monitor. She only cared about the narrative. She only cared that the police were coming for her favorite child. Tears pricked my eyes, not from physical pain, but from the agonizing realization that in this room, I was the only one who actually valued my life. Two police officers entered the room, their radios crackling with static that seemed to cut through the tension like a knife. One was a young rookie, looking overwhelmed, and the other was a seasoned sergeant with tired eyes. Nurse Higgins did not wait for them to ask questions. She stepped forward, her posture rigid and professional. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Bianca. "Officer, I am the head nurse of this ICU unit. At 1400 hours, the cardiac monitor for patient Aaliyah Brooks flatlined. I entered the room immediately and witnessed that woman, the patient's sister, holding the disconnected power cord. The patient was in immediate respiratory distress. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate attempt to terminate life support." The sergeant turned his gaze to Bianca. My sister shrank back against the wall, her lower lip trembling in a perfect performance of victimhood. But before she could speak, my mother stepped in front of her like a human shield. "This is ridiculous," Beatrice announced, her voice echoing with the authority she usually reserved for the church choir. "My daughter is a public figure. She has over 50,000 followers on Instagram. Do you really think she would do something so barbaric? She was trying to help her sister. The cord was loose. She was fixing it." The sergeant narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, we need to take statements separately. If you could step aside." Beatrice did not move. Instead, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and dripping with entitlement. "Actually, before you take anyone anywhere, I think you should speak to Councilman Davis. He is a close personal friend of our family. We just had dinner with him and the chief of police last Sunday. I am sure he would be very interested to hear how his donors are being harassed in a hospital room while their loved one is recovering from surgery." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The rookie officer looked at the sergeant nervously. The mention of the councilman was a magic spell that turned a crime scene into a political minefield. The sergeant sighed, the lines on his forehead deepening. He lowered his notebook slightly. "Ma'am, we just want to establish the facts," the sergeant said, his tone softening perceptibly. "There are no facts to establish other than a equipment malfunction," Beatrice insisted, her eyes locking with the officers. "My daughter Bianca is emotional. She is pregnant. Stress is bad for the baby. Unless you have video evidence, this is just the word of an overzealous nurse against a grieving family." I lay in the bed, my body still heavy with exhaustion, watching the transaction take place. My mother was bartering for my potential murderer's freedom, right in front of me. She was using the social capital my father had built to protect the person who had just tried to erase his legacy. I tried to lift my hand to wave at the officer to scream that Higgins was telling the truth, but my throat was dry as sand. Officer Higgins interrupted, her voice rising in disbelief. "I am an eyewitness." Beatrice cut her off with a glare that could freeze water. "You are an employee," she spat. "And if you want to keep your pension, you will stop making wild accusations against the Brooks family." The sergeant looked at Higgins, then at Bianca, and finally at me. He saw a messy situation involving powerful people, and I could see the resolve leaving his eyes. He capped his pen. "We will need to take everyone down to the station for a voluntary statement," he said, but the handcuffs stayed on his belt. I closed my eyes as a single tear escaped hot and stinging against my cheek. My mother had not asked me if I was okay once. Not once. She had only fought for Bianca. In that moment, as the police escorted them out, not as suspects, but as citizens, assisting an inquiry, I realized I was truly an orphan. The woman who gave birth to me had just chosen her side, and it was not mine. The elevator doors at the end of the hallway slid open with a soft chime that felt too cheerful for the tension in the air. Dante stepped out, still wearing his travel suit, his tie loosened, and his eyes wild with a mixture of exhaustion and terror. My husband is a man who typically commands a room with quiet grace. As an architect, he builds structures designed to withstand storms. But as he strode down the hospital corridor, he looked like the storm itself. He had flown 4 hours from a site visit the moment I missed our scheduled check-in call. He knew me better than anyone. He knew that silence from me meant something was catastrophically wrong. I watched through the open door as he scanned the scene. He saw the police officers closing their notebooks. He saw my mother checking her makeup in a compact mirror, completely unbothered. And then he saw Brad. Brad, always eager to be the voice of authority, stepped away from the group to intercept Dante. My brother-in-law adjusted his blazer, putting on that patronizing frat boy smile he used whenever he spoke to Dante. Brad had always been intimidated by Dante's success and his physical presence, and he compensated by acting as if he were the one in charge of the family's logic. "Whoa there, big guy," Brad said, raising his hands in a gesture that was meant to be calming but felt incredibly condescending. He blocked Dante's path to my room. "Let us just take the temperature down a notch. We do not need any more hysterics today." Dante stopped moving. His chest was heaving. "Where is my wife?" he demanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against the walls. Brad let out a short, dismissive laugh. "She is fine, Dante. Honestly, she is in there resting. You know how Aaliyah gets." The machine made a funny noise and she panicked. "She is just playing the victim again to get under Bianca's skin. It is all a big misunderstanding." The phrase "playing the victim" hung in the air like toxic smoke. I gripped the bedsheet, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream, but I did not have to. Dante looked down at Brad. The silence that followed was terrifying. Dante did not yell. He did not argue. He simply shifted his weight. In one fluid, violent motion, his right fist shot out like a piston. It connected squarely with Brad's jaw with a sickening, meaty crunch that echoed down the sterile hallway. Brad did not stumble. He dropped. He hit the linoleum floor like a sack of wet cement, his eyes rolling back in his head as he clutched his face. A trickle of blood began to pool near his expensive loafers. My mother shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure outrage. "Oh my God! He assaulted him. Officer, arrest this man. He just attacked my son-in-law." The sergeant looked down at Brad, who was groaning and spitting blood, and then looked up at Dante, who was calmly adjusting his cufflinks. The officer did not reach for his handcuffs. Instead, he looked at my mother and said, "Ma'am, from where I am standing, it looked like your son-in-law tripped." Dante stepped over Brad's writhing body as if he were stepping over a piece of trash. He rushed into my room and fell to his knees beside my bed. His large, warm hands cupped my face, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears I had not realized were falling. "I am here, baby," he whispered, his voice trembling with the adrenaline of a man who almost lost his world. "I am here. And I promise you nobody is ever going to touch you again." The room was quiet after Dante was escorted out to give a statement regarding the punch. The nurses had cleared the blood from the floor, and the hum of the machinery was the only sound left in the wake of the chaos. For the first time since the surgery, my mind felt razor sharp. The anesthesia had worn off, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the little dots, trying to process the fact that the people who shared my DNA were the same people who wanted me dead. The door creaked open. I expected Dante to return, or perhaps Nurse Higgins to check my vitals again, but it was Beatrice. My mother slipped inside the room and closed the door softly behind her, clicking the lock. She did not rush to my side. She did not look at the monitors to see if my heart was steady. Instead, she walked over to the window and adjusted the blinds, ensuring that no one from the hallway could see inside. She smoothed her skirt and turned to me. Her face was composed, her makeup flawless, as if she were about to address the congregation at Sunday service, rather than her daughter who had just survived an assassination attempt. She pulled the visitor chair close to the bed, the metal legs scraping harshly against the floor. "You need to stop this nonsense immediately," Beatrice said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. I saw the lines of cruelty around her mouth that she usually hid with expensive lipstick. I saw the emptiness in her eyes. "Stop what?" I asked. My voice raspy but steady. "Stop breathing." Because that is what Bianca wanted. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Do not be dramatic. Bianca made a mistake. She panicked. But you, Aaliyah, you are making a choice. A choice to destroy this family. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? The annual charity gala is in 2 weeks. Councilman Davis is considering Brad for a position on the planning board. If word gets out that you had your sister arrested, we will be ruined." She leaned in closer, invading my personal space. Her perfume, usually a scent of comfort, now smelled like betrayal. "Listen to me closely. If you press charges against your sister, you are no longer my daughter. I will cut you off. You will not be welcome at Sunday dinner. You will not be welcome at Christmas. I will tell the entire church board that you are mentally unstable and vindictive. Do not let this story leave this room." My heart hammered against my ribs, but it was not from fear. It was from a sudden, overwhelming realization. The mother I had spent 32 years trying to please, the woman whose approval I had chased like a desperate puppy, did not exist. In her place sat a monster in a Chanel suit who cared more about a gala invite than her child's life. The bond between us, already frayed, snapped. It was a physical sensation, a weight lifting off my chest that was heavier than the fluid in my lungs. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sterile hospital air that tasted like freedom. I looked Beatrice dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not cry. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left in my recovering body. "Get out," I said. Beatrice blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me." "I said get out of my room," I repeated louder this time. "You are not my mother. You are an accomplice. And you can tell the church whatever you want. Because when I am done with Bianca and Brad, there won't be a reputation left to save. Now get out before I press that call button and have Higgins drag you out in front of the entire floor." Beatrice stood up, her face turning a mottled shade of red. She opened her mouth to speak, to curse me, to manipulate me one last time, but she saw something in my eyes she had never seen before. She saw that she had no power left. She grabbed her purse and marched to the door, slamming it behind her. As the latch clicked, I let out a long breath and closed my eyes. The war had officially begun. The wheelchair ride to the curb felt less like a discharge and more like a retreat from a war zone. Dante pushed me silently through the automatic doors, his grip on the handles tight enough to turn his knuckles white. The Seattle sky was a bruising shade of gray, matching the emptiness in my chest. There were no balloons. There were no flowers. There was no mother waiting with the car running, ready to drive me home and make me soup. There was just the cold wind and the realization that the only person in the world who truly cared if I lived or died was the man helping me into the passenger seat of his sedan. The drive home was quiet. Dante kept glancing at me, checking to see if I was in pain, but the physical ache of my incision was nothing compared to the phantom vibration of my phone. I had turned it off in the ICU, but as we pulled into our driveway, I finally powered it back on. It was a mistake. The device instantly overheated, flooding with hundreds of notifications. Text messages from cousins I had not spoken to in years, direct messages from strangers, tag notifications on Instagram. My stomach churned. I opened the app and there it was. A photo of Bianca looking somber and tearful, filtered to perfection in black and white. She was holding a rosary, a prop I knew she had not touched since her confirmation 10 years ago. The caption made bile rise in my throat. It is with a heavy heart that I ask for prayers for my older sister Aaliyah, Bianca wrote. The post had already amassed 12,000 likes. Mental health is a silent battle, and sometimes the people we love do desperate things for attention. Yesterday, our family faced a tragedy when Aaliyah tried to disconnect her own life support during a manic episode. We are devastated that she feels this alone, but we are standing by her side. Please respect our privacy as we try to get her the professional help she so clearly needs. Hashtag mental health awareness. Hashtag pray for Aaliyah. Hashtag sisterhood. I read the words twice, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity of the lie. She had not just covered her tracks, she had flipped the script entirely. She was painting herself as the grieving, supportive sister, and me as the unstable, suicidal patient. She was gaslighting the entire internet. I scrolled down to the comments. They were a landslide of sympathy for the monster who tried to kill me. Stay strong, Bianca. You are such a good sister. I hope she gets committed for her own safety. God gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers. My hands shook not from weakness, but from rage. She was using her platform, her army of gullible followers, to destroy my credibility before I could even tell my side of the story. If I went to the police now, her lawyer would simply point to this. See, officer. She is unstable. She is the crazy one. Dante parked the car and looked over at me, seeing the glow of the screen on my face. Do not look at it, Aaliyah, he said gently, reaching for the phone. I pulled it back, my eyes glued to the screen as my mother liked the post. Beatrice had actually liked the post accusing her daughter of a psychotic break. I am not looking at it, Dante, I whispered, taking a screenshot and saving it to a hidden folder. I am collecting evidence. Bianca thinks she just won the narrative. She has no idea she just gave me the motive I need to bury her. Sunday morning arrived with a leaden sky that matched the dread settling in my stomach. Dante begged me to stay home. He said walking into Greater Hope Baptist Church was walking into a lion's den without a whip. But hiding would only validate Bianca's narrative that I was unstable and ashamed. I put on my best navy dress, applied my lipstick with a steady hand, and walked out the door. I refused to let their lies keep me from my pew. The parking lot was full. As we walked toward the heavy oak doors, the usual chorus of greetings died in the air. People I had known since I was in Sunday school, elders who had given me peppermint candies when I was 5, suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting. The silence was louder than any shout. We entered the sanctuary. The air smelled of floor wax and expensive perfume. Usually, Mrs. Jenkins, the head usher, would greet me with a hug that could crack ribs. Today she saw me coming and deliberately turned her back to adjust a stack of bulletins. I heard her whisper to Deacon Miller, "It is a shame when the devil gets a hold of a young mind. Pray for her soul, but do not let her sit near the choir." I kept walking, my head held high though my knees felt like water. We took a seat near the back. From this vantage point, I had a perfect view of the performance taking place in the front row. My mother Beatrice was holding court. She was dressed in somber charcoal, not quite black, but close enough to suggest mourning. She sat dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief while a circle of church mothers hovered around her, fanning her and patting her shoulders. She looked fragile. She looked devastated. She looked like a saint bearing the cross of a troubled child. It was a master class in manipulation. Beatrice knew exactly how to weaponize pity. She was not just a member here. She was the treasurer. She held the purse strings and therefore she held the sympathy. When Pastor Williams took the pulpit, my heart sank further. He had baptized me. He had officiated my wedding. Surely a man of God would see the truth. But as he scanned the congregation, his gaze landed on me and hardened. There was no warmth, only judgment. He opened his Bible and began to speak. Today, church family, I want to talk about the spirit of confusion. He boomed, his voice resonating off the stained glass. We have families in our midst hurting because the enemy has attacked the mind of a loved one. We must pray for those who seek attention through destruction. We must pray for daughters who have lost their way and turned against the mothers who birthed them. A chorus of amens rippled through the room. Every amen felt like a slap in the face. He was not preaching the gospel. He was preaching Beatrice's press release. I felt Dante's hand grip mine, his anger radiating like heat, but I sat frozen. They had turned my sanctuary into a courtroom, and I had been found guilty before the service even began. I looked at my mother's back, watching her nod in agreement with the sermon, and realized that to these people, the truth did not matter, only the performance did. The doorbell rang at 9 on Monday morning, piercing the silence of the house like a warning shot. Dante had just left for a site meeting, leaving me alone with a cup of herbal tea and my mounting anxiety. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Standing on my porch adjusting his silk tie as if he were preparing for a board meeting was Brad. A large purplish bruise bloomed across his jawline, a souvenir from Dante's fist that he seemed to be wearing like a badge of martyrdom. I opened the door, not out of courtesy, but curiosity. I wanted to see what a desperate man looked like up close. Brad did not wait for an invitation. He breezed past me into the foyer, bringing a gust of expensive cologne and entitlement with him. He marched straight to the living room and placed a thick leather portfolio on the coffee table. "Good morning, Aaliyah," he said, his voice smooth, lacking any trace of the anger he had shown at the hospital. "I hope you are resting. Beatrice is worried sick about you. She thinks you are spiraling." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. "What do you want, Brad?" He sighed, sitting down on my sofa and spreading his arms wide. "I want peace. I want this family to heal. Look, I know you are confused right now. The medication, the trauma of the surgery, it messes with your head. We all understand that. That is why I drafted this." He tapped the leather folder. "Inside is a non-disclosure agreement and a waiver of liability." He explained, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you sign this admitting that the hospital incident was a misunderstanding caused by your post-operative delirium, I will not press assault charges against Dante. I have a witness, you know. My jaw is fractured. I could put your husband in jail for 5 years. But I am a benevolent man. I do not want to break up a family." I stared at the paperwork. He was using my husband's freedom as a bargaining chip to cover up his wife's crime. But he was not done. He flipped to the second page and his eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger. "And there is one more thing," he said, pulling a Mont Blanc pen from his pocket. "Beatrice and I agree that managing your father's trust fund is too much stress for your heart condition. You need to focus on healing, not numbers. This document grants me power of attorney over the estate. Just temporary, of course, until you are better. I have a background in finance, Aaliyah. I can make that money grow in ways you would not understand." The audacity was breathtaking. He was asking the woman he tried to kill to hand him the weapon. He thought I was just a sick girl who was good at spending money, not the woman who had quietly grown her own portfolio by 300% in the last 5 years. He saw a victim. I saw a man who was terrified. I looked at his shoes. They were scuffed. I looked at his cuffs. They were frayed. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. He did not just want the money. He needed it. He was not here to conquer me. He was here to rob me, because he was drowning. I picked up the pen. Brad's eyes lit up. I twirled it between my fingers, feeling the weight of his desperation. "Leave the papers, Brad," I said softly. "I need to read them over with my tea." He hesitated, sensing a shift, but his arrogance won out. He stood up and patted my shoulder. "Take your time. But do not take too long. The police are waiting for my statement on Dante. You make the right choice, sweetheart. Let the men handle the business." As the door clicked shut behind him, I did not cry. I walked to my home office, turned on my high-security server, and prepared to dig into the finances of Mr. Brad Miller. He wanted to talk about business. I was about to give him a lesson in economics he would never forget. The silence Brad left behind was shattered 2 hours later, not by a doorbell, but by the sound of my front door unlocking. My mother still had a key, a courtesy I had forgotten to revoke in the chaos of the last week. She did not knock. She simply barged in, practically carrying Bianca, who was draped over her shoulder like a wounded soldier returning from battle. They collapsed onto my living room sofa, a sprawling mess of tears and accusations. Bianca was clutching her stomach with both hands, her face buried in a throw pillow, emitting low, rhythmic moans of distress. Beatrice stood over her, fanning her frantically with a piece of junk mail she had grabbed from the foyer table. "Look at her," Beatrice screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Look at what you have done to your sister." I stood by the fireplace, keeping my distance. "What is happening?" I asked, my voice flat. "She is having cramps," Beatrice hissed. "The doctor said her blood pressure is lethal." "The stress of your arrest threats the police, questioning the social media backlash you caused by not defending her. It is sending her body into shock. You almost killed my grandson today, Aaliyah." Bianca let out a particularly loud wail. "My baby," she sobbed into the velvet cushion. "I can feel him stressing. I am scared, Mom. I do not want to lose him." Beatrice marched over to me, her eyes blazing with grandmotherly fury. "You need to fix this. You need to apologize to her right now. Kneel down and beg her forgiveness for endangering the future of this family. That boy is the first male heir of the Brooks line in a generation. If she miscarries, that blood is on your hands forever." I looked at my mother, then I looked at Bianca. I studied her, really studied her. She was wearing a tight beige knit dress that clung to every curve, specifically designed to highlight her pregnancy. According to the announcement she had made at Easter dinner, she was barely 12 weeks along. At 12 weeks, a fetus is the size of a plum. Most women barely show. But the mound protruding from Bianca's abdomen was significant. It looked round, firm, and undeniably large. It looked like the stomach of a woman who was 5 or 6 months pregnant, not 3. I narrowed my eyes. The geometry was wrong. The timeline was impossible. I remembered New Year's Eve. That was exactly 3 months ago. We were in Cabo San Lucas. I vividly remembered holding Bianca's hair back while she vomited up 4 margaritas and a tequila shot. I remembered her smoking a vape on the balcony the next morning to cure her hangover. If she was 12 weeks pregnant now, she was conceiving right around the time she was pickling her liver in Mexico. I watched her shift on the couch. As she moved, the bump seemed to shift with her, but not in the fluid way natural flesh moves. It moved as a solid unit, slightly rigid, riding high on her rib cage before settling back down. Aaliyah, Beatrice snapped, snapping her fingers in front of my face. I said, "Apologize. Tell your sister you will drop this insanity so she can have a peaceful pregnancy." I took a slow sip of my tea, my mind racing. They were using this unborn child as a human shield. They knew I would never risk hurting a baby. But as I watched Bianca clutch a stomach that defied the laws of biology, a dark suspicion took root in my mind. "I am sorry you are in pain, Bianca," I said carefully, choosing my words like a lawyer. "You should probably drink some water. Dehydration is terrible for silicone. I mean the skin." Bianca froze mid-sob. Her eyes darted to mine wide with sudden panic. Beatrice did not catch the slip, but Bianca did. She pulled the pillow tighter over her stomach, hiding the evidence. I did not apologize. I just watched and I started planning my next call. It would not be to a doctor. It would be to a private investigator. The phone did not stop ringing. It was a physical assault, a constant buzzing that drilled into my skull like a dental tool. My mother had clearly activated the family phone tree, a network usually reserved for funeral announcements or graduation parties. Today, the emergency was me. I was the cancer that needed to be cut out to save the body. I made the mistake of answering a call from Uncle Marcus. Marcus was the patriarch of the extended Brooks family, a retired judge who valued reputation above oxygen. I put him on speaker so Dante could hear the venom firsthand. Aaliyah, his voice boomed rich with disappointment and authority. I heard about your little stunt at the hospital. I have never been more ashamed to share a last name with someone. Your grandfather worked himself into an early grave to build this family's standing in Seattle. We are pillars of the community. We are Black excellence, and you are trying to tear it all down because you are jealous of your sister's happiness. I tried to speak, my voice trembling. Uncle Marcus, she tried to kill me. She pulled the plug. He cut me off instantly. Silence. I do not want to hear your delusions. Bianca is carrying the future of this family. You are a barren woman with a bad heart and a bitter spirit. If you drag this family through the mud of a public trial, do not bother showing up to the reunion. Do not bother showing up to my funeral. You are a disgrace to our blood. The line went dead. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the black screen. A disgrace. That was what I was to them. Not the daughter who managed the family investments for free. Not the daughter who stayed by Grandma's bedside when she died. I was just the obstacle in the way of the golden child. Then came the texts from Auntie Sarah. They were paragraphs of scripture twisted into weapons. She quoted verses about honoring thy mother and father, conveniently ignoring the commandment about thou shalt not kill. She told me that God does not like ugly, and that my heart condition was a physical manifestation of my rotted soul. I felt the room shrinking. It felt like the walls were closing in, built from the bricks of their collective judgment. The isolation was absolute. The people who were supposed to be my safety net were the ones holding the knives. I was the villain in their story simply because I refused to be the victim in mine. I felt small, defenseless, and utterly alone in a world that refused to see me. Dante walked over and gently took the phone from my hand. He powered it down completely and slid it into his pocket. Enough, he said, his voice thick with emotion, as he wrapped his arms around my shaking shoulders. We are changing your number tomorrow. You do not need to listen to them rewrite history. You have me. You hear me. You have me. But before the screen had gone black, one notification popped up that gave me a sliver of air. It was not from a relative, it was from Nurse Higgins. The text was short. I filed the official incident report with the hospital board this morning. The footage is secured. Do not let them break you, baby girl. The truth is coming. I looked at Dante, then at the blank phone. The entire Brooks dynasty had turned its back on me, but the two people who actually knew the truth were standing right beside me. And in that moment of crushing loneliness, I realized that a husband who loved me and a nurse who respected the law were a stronger army than 100 relatives bound by lies. That night, the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our living room felt less like weather and more like a cage. It was 3 a.m, the witching hour for anxiety. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the settlement papers Brad had left. The legal jargon blurred under the dim pendant lights: liability waiver, non-disclosure agreement, transfer of trusteeship. It all looked so simple. All I had to do was sign my name and the phone calls would stop. The hatred would stop. I could just disappear into a quiet life with Dante and let them have the money. I was tired of fighting. I was tired of being the villain in a story where I was the one who almost died. I picked up the pen. The metal felt cold against my fingers. I hovered the tip over the signature line, my hand trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and defeat. Do not you dare put ink on that paper. Dante's voice broke the silence. I had not heard him come down the stairs. He walked into the kitchen, not with the softness of a comforting husband, but with the intensity of an architect who had just found a crack in the foundation. He pulled the pen from my hand and tossed it across the granite counter. "They win if you sign that, Aaliyah," he said, opening his laptop and setting it in front of me. "And they do not deserve to win. You think they are attacking you because they hate you. You are wrong. They are attacking you because they are terrified." I rubbed my temples. "Dante, please. I have no fight left. My own mother thinks I am crazy." "Watch this," he commanded, pressing the spacebar. The screen lit up with grainy footage from the dashcam of Dante's Tesla. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago, just hours after the hospital incident. The car was parked outside a seedy strip mall on the outskirts of Tacoma, a place Brad would never be caught dead in unless he was buying drugs or hiding something. In the video, Brad's Mercedes pulled up. He got out, looking over his shoulder nervously. A moment later, a man stepped out of the shadows. He was not a business partner. He was wearing a leather jacket and had the unmistakable posture of a man who broke legs for a living. I watched mesmerized as Brad handed the man a thick envelope. The man opened it, counted the cash, and then shoved Brad against the car door. I gasped. Brad, the arrogant finance bro who looked down on everyone, was trembling. The man pointed a finger in Brad's face, shouted something that the camera could not pick up, and then walked away. Brad slumped against his car, wiping sweat from his forehead. Dante paused the video on Brad's terrified face. I followed him because I wanted to know who he was crying to. Dante said, "That guy is not a banker, Aaliyah. That is Silas Vane. He runs a loan shark operation out of the docks. Brad is not investing the family money. He is paying off a debt." The fog in my brain instantly cleared. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with a violent clarity. Bianca pulling the plug was not just about jealousy. It was a timeline. They needed my life insurance payout immediately. The rush to get power of attorney was not about my health. It was about accessing the trust fund to save Brad's kneecaps. I looked at the frozen image of my brother-in-law cowering in a parking lot. My sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. They were not powerful matriarchs and businessmen. They were desperate, broke scavengers picking at my bones to pay their gambling debts. I closed the laptop and looked at Dante. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "They are not just mean, Dante. They are insolvent. And I'm going to prove it. Get the coffee. We have work to do." The rain lashed against the windows, matching the storm brewing inside me. Dante had gone to check the perimeter security one last time, leaving me alone in the dim light of my home office. I sat before my 3-monitor setup, the glow of the screens reflecting in my eyes. To my family, I was just Aaliyah, the sickly accountant, the one who was good with calculators but bad with life. They had no idea that I had built the entire digital infrastructure of the Brooks Family Trust. And they certainly had no idea that when my father died, he had given me a master key they could never revoke. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. The rhythmic clatter of the mechanical keyboard was the only sound in the room. I navigated to the secure portal of the First National Bank of Seattle. Brad had been so arrogant when he demanded power of attorney earlier today. He thought he was locking me out. He did not realize he was just handing me the motivation to break back in. I entered my username. Access denied. I smirked. Of course. Brad had changed the front door locks. He was predictable. But a good architect always builds a back door. I opened a command terminal and bypassed the user interface, entirely logging in through the legacy admin portal I had set up 5 years ago for my father. The system hesitated for a heartbeat, then flashed green. Access granted. I was in. I started with the Brooks Family Trust. This was the holy grail, the accumulation of 3 generations of hard work, real estate deals, and wise investments. The last time I had audited the account 6 months ago, it held a healthy balance of $4.2 million, with another $8 million in diversified assets. It was meant to be the safety net for the entire family, the fund that paid for college tuitions and emergency medical bills. I pulled up the current dashboard. My breath hitched in my throat. I blinked, sure that the medication was making me hallucinate. I hit refresh. The number remained the same, $0.00. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. It was impossible. You do not just lose $4 million in 6 months without setting off alarms. I dove into the transaction history, scrolling furiously. The records were a bloodbath. 6 months ago, right around the time Brad took over day-to-day operations while I was in the hospital for my first surgery, the withdrawals began. Small at first, 10,000 here for consulting fees, 15,000 there for market research. Then they grew bolder. Wire transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Massive cash withdrawals labeled as property maintenance for buildings we did not even own anymore. I clicked on the recipient of the largest transfer, a sum of nearly $1 million sent just 3 weeks ago. The company was called Vane Holdings. I froze. Vane. As in Silas Vane, the loan shark Dante had filmed Brad paying off in the parking lot. My stomach churned. Brad had not just made bad investments, he had liquidated our entire heritage to pay for his gambling addiction and to keep a criminal organization from breaking his legs. I switched tabs to my mother's personal accounts. Beatrice, the woman who walked around church like royalty, was destitute. Her savings account was overdrawn by $12,000. Her credit cards were maxed out. The mortgage payments on the family estate were 3 months behind. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were not just greedy, they were drowning. The attempt on my life, the rush for the insurance money, the desperate need for power of attorney, it was not about getting richer, it was about survival. They needed my $5 million policy to plug the black hole Brad had created before the bank took the house and the mob took his life. I leaned back in my chair, the light from the screen casting long shadows across the room. I had the evidence. I had the smoking gun. But I was not going to hand it over to the police just yet. I was going to use it to watch them squirm. I hit print. The deeper I dug into Brad's digital footprint, the more the image of the successful stockbroker crumbled, revealing the desperate gambler hiding beneath the designer suits. I followed the trail of the missing trust fund money. It had not been moved to safe bonds or blue-chip stocks as he had claimed in the quarterly reports. Instead, it had been funneled into a high-risk cryptocurrency exchange. I pulled up the trading history and my jaw tightened. It was a bloodbath. Brad had bought into speculative altcoins at their peak right before the market crashed last winter. I watched the transaction logs in horror. He had thrown $500,000 at a coin named after a dog meme, and within 48 hours its value had dropped by 90%. But he did not stop there. Like every addict chasing a loss, he doubled down. He drained another $1 million from the family accounts to buy the dip, convinced the market would rebound. It never did. $2 million of my father's hard-earned legacy had evaporated into the digital ether, turned into worthless code, by a man who thought he was smarter than the market. But the crypto losses were just the beginning. I found transfers to offshore accounts in Curaçao and Costa Rica. I recognized the merchant codes immediately. They were online sportsbooks. Brad wasn't just a bad investor, he was a degenerate gambler. He had bet on everything from NFL games to obscure European soccer leagues. The win-loss ratio was pathetic. He was hemorrhaging cash, thousands of dollars a day, trying to win back the millions he had already lost in crypto. Then I found the piece of evidence that tied the noose around his neck. It was a scanned document in a hidden folder on the shared drive labeled simply as loan agreement. I opened it. It was not from a bank. It was a predatory lending contract from Vane Holdings. The terms were barbaric. Brad had borrowed $500,000 at an interest rate that was illegal in 49 states. The collateral listed was not his car or his watch. It was my mother's house. I scrolled to the bottom of the document. The repayment schedule was strict. A lump sum payment of $500,000 plus interest was due on the last day of this month. I glanced at the calendar on my desk. That was in 3 days. The realization hit me like a splash of ice water. The timeline matched perfectly. If I had died in that hospital room 3 days ago, the insurance investigation would have taken 24 hours. The payout of $5 million would have been expedited to the primary beneficiary, my mother, just in time for Brad to intercept it and pay off Silas Vane before the deadline. My murder had a deadline. It was not a crime of passion. It was an accounts payable transaction. Brad did not hate me. He just needed my death to balance his ledger before Silas Vane came to collect his kneecaps. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting the cold fury in my eyes. He had gambled away our past, and he had tried to trade my future to cover his debts. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He forgot that the sister he called weak was the only one who knew how to read the fine print. I navigated to the real estate portfolio, expecting to see the deed to the family estate safe and unencumbered. The house on Highland Drive was my mother's pride and joy. It was a sprawling 6-bedroom colonial that my father had bought in the 90s to prove to the world that a black man from the South Side had made it. Beatrice treated that house like a museum. She would sooner cut off her own hand than risk losing it. But when I opened the file marked Deed and Title, the screen did not show a clear ownership record. It showed a lien. I squinted, leaning closer to the monitor. 6 months ago, a second mortgage had been taken out on the property. The amount was staggering: $700,000. I clicked on the scanned document, my heart pounding against my ribs. There, at the bottom of the page, was my mother's signature. It was shaky, perhaps hurried, but it was undeniably hers. And right next to it, witnessing the document as the notary, was a friend of Brad's from the country club. I sat back, trying to piece together the narrative. Beatrice was terrified of debt. She preached about the evils of owing money every Sunday. There was no way she knowingly signed a second mortgage. Then I saw the date. It was the same week my father's memorial scholarship was established. Brad had likely buried this document in a stack of papers for the scholarship fund, telling her it was just another administrative form. He had tricked my mother into pawning her own sanctuary. But the horror did not stop at the loan. I accessed the correspondence log between the bank and the homeowner. Notice of default. Sent 3 months ago. Notice of acceleration. Sent 2 months ago. Notice of intent to foreclose. Sent last week. My mother was living in a house that was technically already gone. The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings. But why hadn't she said anything? Beatrice would have been screaming from the rooftops if the bank had threatened her home. I checked the mailing address on the bank's file. It had been changed. The foreclosure notices were not going to Highland Drive. They were going to a P.O. box in downtown Seattle. A P.O. box registered to Brad Miller. He was intercepting the mail. He was hiding the foreclosure notices while he frantically tried to scramble up the cash to pay off the arrears before the sheriff showed up to evict them. That was why he needed my life insurance. He wasn't just paying off the loan shark, he was trying to buy back the house he had stolen before Beatrice found out she was homeless. The sheer scale of the betrayal took my breath away. Brad was letting my mother sleep in a house that was days away from being auctioned off on the courthouse steps, all while she cooked him dinner and defended him to the police. He had stripped her of her security, her dignity, and her legacy, and she was too busy hating me to notice. I looked at the foreclosure date. The auction was scheduled for next Friday. I had 4 days. 4 days before my mother was thrown onto the street. A normal daughter would call her mother and warn her. A normal daughter would scream the truth. But I was not a normal daughter anymore. I was a strategist. And I realized that if the bank was selling the house, that meant anyone could buy it, including me. The financial audit provided the motive, but I needed concrete proof of the method. I knew Brad was desperate enough to steal, but was Bianca truly sociopathic enough to fake a human life just to secure an inheritance? To find out I hired Marcus Thorne, a private investigator who usually handled corporate espionage. I needed someone who could disappear into the background of Bianca's superficial world without being noticed. 48 hours later, a courier delivered a heavy manila envelope to my doorstep. I took it into the kitchen where Dante was brewing coffee. The air in the room grew heavy as I cut the seal. I spread the glossy 8 by 10 photographs across the granite island. They were high resolution, taken with a long-range lens, and they told a story of deception so brazen it made my stomach turn. The first set of photos was taken yesterday afternoon. Bianca had told our mother she was going to a prenatal yoga class. The photos showed her entering the Emerald City Med Spa, a clinic known for aggressive cosmetic procedures. The next few shots showed her in the consultation room through a glass wall. She was not getting a pregnancy massage. She was lying on a table, her midriff exposed, hooked up to a laser lipolysis machine. I stared at the image. Laser fat removal. A procedure strictly forbidden for pregnant women because the high heat and laser energy could harm a fetus. No doctor would perform it, and no mother would risk it. Unless, of course, there was no baby to harm. The second set of photos was even more damning. They were taken last night at the Velvet Rope, a speakeasy in downtown Seattle that required a membership key to enter. Bianca sat in a dark corner booth. She was not drinking water. She was holding a martini glass, the condensation dripping down her manicured fingers. In the next shot, she was throwing her head back, laughing with a group of friends, a lit cigarette in her other hand. But the final series of photos was the smoking gun. Thorne had followed her to her car in the parking garage. The sequence was like a frame-by-frame breakdown of a magic trick. Frame 1. Bianca opens the driver's side door of her Range Rover. Frame 2. She looks around to ensure the coast is clear. Frame 3. She reaches under her loose-fitting sweater. Frame 4. She unbuckles a strap at her lower back. Frame 5. She pulls a large, flesh-colored mound out from under her shirt and tosses it onto the passenger seat. It was a silicone prosthetic, a theatrical prop, a fake belly used by actresses and apparently by my sister. Dante picked up the photo, his face twisting in disgust. "She is not pregnant," he whispered. "She is wearing a costume." I looked at the photos of my sister, the woman who had cried on my mother's shoulder about cramps and high blood pressure, the woman who had demanded I kneel and apologize for endangering her child. There was no child. There was no heir. There was only a silicone mold and a plot to emotionally blackmail our mother into handing over the estate. Bianca was not carrying the future of the Brooks family. She was carrying a lie strapped to her waist. And I was about to make sure everyone saw exactly what was underneath it. I met Nurse Higgins at a small rundown diner on the southern edge of Seattle, far away from the prying eyes of the country club set and my mother's church spies. The rain was hammering against the neon sign outside, casting a flickering red glow over the booth where she sat. She was not wearing her scrubs. Dressed in a heavy trench coat and a wool hat, she looked less like a medical professional and more like a woman on the run. In a way, she was. By agreeing to meet me, she was putting a 30-year career on the line. I slid into the booth opposite her. She did not smile. She pushed a lukewarm cup of coffee toward me and leaned in, her voice barely rising above the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. "They fired me this morning," Higgins said flatly. My heart stopped. I reached for her hand across the table, guilt washing over me. "Higgins, I am so sorry. I never wanted this to happen." She waved my apology away with a calloused hand. "Do not be sorry. Be angry. That is what I am. They did not fire me for incompetence. They fired me for insubordination. Apparently, refusing to alter a patient care report is grounds for termination when the patient's brother-in-law plays golf with the hospital director." I stiffened. Brad? Of course. I knew he was desperate, but I had underestimated how deep his rot went. He had leveraged his connection with the director to scrub the incident from the official record. They wiped the servers. Higgins continued taking a sip of her black coffee. The director called me into his office. He told me there was a technical glitch. The security footage from room 304 was corrupted, lost forever. He told me that if I kept spreading rumors about a prominent donor's family, I would lose my pension. He thought that would scare me. He thought I was just some old lady who needed a paycheck more than she needed her dignity. She reached into her coat pocket. Her movements were slow and deliberate. She pulled out a small silver USB drive and placed it in the center of the table. It sat there between the sugar packets and the ketchup bottle, looking innocuous, but I knew it was radioactive. He forgot one thing, Higgins said, a small triumphant smile touching her lips. He forgot that I was the one who requested the installation of the backup redundant system in the ICU 5 years ago. It is a fail-safe, independent power supply, independent storage, and unlike the hallway cameras which only record video, these units record high-definition audio. My eyes widened. Audio? The video alone was damning, but audio meant there would be no ambiguity. No one could claim Bianca was just checking the machine. I went down to the server room 10 minutes before they called me into the office, she whispered. I made a copy. It is all there, Aaliyah. The moment she walked in, the sound of her heels, the sound of her voice telling you to die so she could get the money, and the sound of the machine flatlining. She slid the drive across the table until it touched my fingertips. The metal was cold, but it burned my skin. This is the only copy, Higgins said, her eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. I suggest you do not give this to the police just yet. If the director is involved, the evidence might disappear from the evidence locker too. You need to play this publicly. You need to make it impossible for them to bury it. I closed my hand around the drive. It felt heavy, heavier than it looked. It was the weight of my sister's freedom and my mother's reputation. Thank you, I whispered, my throat tight. Do not thank me, Higgins said, standing up and buttoning her coat. Just make sure you nail them. Nail them for every patient who did not have a voice. I watched her walk out into the rain, a soldier in a war she did not start but was determined to finish. I looked down at the drive in my hand. Brad thought he had cleaned up the mess. He thought he had silenced the witness. He had no idea that the real weapon was sitting in my pocket ready to detonate. The meeting with the senior vice president of First National Bank took place on the top floor, a level reserved for clients whose assets exceeded 8 figures. When I walked in, Mr. Henderson looked confused. He knew the Brooks family name and he knew our current financial standing was radioactive. He expected a plea for an extension or a desperate negotiation to stop the foreclosure. What he did not expect was for the black sheep of the family to slide a cashier's check across his mahogany desk for the full amount of the arrears, plus the remaining principal balance of the mortgage. 17 years. That is how long I had been quietly building my empire. While Bianca was spending her allowance on designer bags and my mother was donating thousands to the church for front row seats, I was reading financial reports. I started investing when I was 20, using the small stipend my grandfather left me. I poured every cent into tech startups and blue-chip stocks, reinvesting every dividend, living well below my means. To my family, I was Aaliyah, the sickly accountant who drove a used Honda. In the eyes of the IRS, I was a silent multimillionaire. Mr. Henderson picked up the check. His eyes widened slightly as he verified the funds. $750,000. It was enough to clear the toxic debt Brad had saddled the estate with. You understand what this means? Ms. Brooks Henderson asked, peering over his spectacles. By purchasing this note, the bank is assigning all rights to you. You are stepping into the shoes of the lender. You are not paying off the mortgage for your mother. You are becoming her mortgage holder. I nodded, my face impassive. I understand perfectly. I want the deed transferred to my holding company, Nemesis LLC, effective immediately. And I want the foreclosure proceedings paused just long enough for me to handle the eviction personally. He stamped the papers. The sound echoed in the quiet office like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. With that single ink stain, the power dynamic of my entire life shifted. For 32 years, Beatrice had held that house over my head. It was her kingdom, and I was just a subject allowed to live there by her grace. She used the roof over my head to silence me, to control me, to make me feel small. Now I owned the roof. I walked out of the bank with the assignment of mortgage in my briefcase. The rain had stopped, leaving the Seattle streets washed clean. I sat in my car and looked at the document. Technically, Brad and my mother now owed me $750,000. And since they had defaulted on the terms of the loan, I had the legal right to seize the property whenever I chose. I pulled out my phone and saw a text from Beatrice. It was a picture of Bianca holding a pair of baby shoes captioned, "Can't wait for the baby shower. You better be planning something special." I stared at the screen and smiled, a cold, sharp expression that didn't reach my eyes. Oh, I was planning something special, all right. I wasn't just bringing a gift to the party, I was bringing the eviction notice. I started the engine. It was time to set the trap. I sat in the driver's seat of my car with the engine idling, the heater blasting against the damp Seattle chill. The deed to the house was safely locked in the glove compartment, a silent testament to my new power. But power is useless if your enemy sees it coming. To spring the trap effectively, I had to make them believe I was defeated. I had to become the weak, fragile, submissive daughter they had always groomed me to be. I took a deep breath, pitching my voice up an octave to sound thin and exhausted. I dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring, her tone sharp and impatient. "I hope you are calling to tell me you have come to your senses, Aaliyah. I have a prayer circle starting in 10 minutes, and I do not have time for your stubbornness." I let out a shaky, broken sigh into the receiver. "Mom, I am tired." The silence on the other end was heavy. I could practically hear her ears perking up. I continued, letting a tremor enter my voice. "I cannot do this anymore. The isolation, the hate mail, Uncle Marcus calling me a disgrace. It is too much for my heart. You were right. You were right about everything. I am just sick and confused, and I tried to hurt the family because I was jealous of Bianca." Beatrice let out a long, satisfied breath. "Well, praise God. I knew the Lord would touch your heart eventually. It takes a big person to admit they are broken, Aaliyah." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, but I kept my voice meek. "I want to end this, Mom. Tell Brad to bring the papers. The liability waiver, the power of attorney, the transfer of the trust fund. I will sign everything. I just want my family back. I do not want to be alone." There was a pause, and then my mother's voice shifted. The sharpness was gone, replaced by a sickeningly sweet tone she usually reserved for the pastor. "That is wonderful news, baby. Brad will be so relieved. He has been so worried about your financial burden. We can come over to your house tonight to get the signatures." "No," I interrupted quickly. "Not my house. I want to do this right. I want to apologize to Bianca properly. I want to host a dinner, tomorrow night, at Le Cavalier." Le Cavalier was the most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where my mother loved to be seen. "I want to treat everyone," I said. "I want to sign the papers in front of the whole family, so everyone knows that I am truly sorry, and that Brad is officially in charge. Invite Uncle Marcus. Invite the cousins. Invite the pastor. I want to make a public testimony of my repentance." Beatrice was practically purring now. The idea of a public victory lap was irresistible to her. A dinner at Le Cavalier paid for by me, where she could watch her scapegoat daughter kneel before the golden child. It was her dream scenario. "That sounds lovely, Aaliyah," she said. "I am so proud of you for finally knowing your place. I will call Bianca and Brad immediately. We will see you tomorrow at 7. Wear something nice. Do not embarrass us." She hung up without saying "I love you." I lowered the phone and stared at the dashboard. My reflection in the rearview mirror was not that of a broken woman. It was the face of a hunter who had just watched the prey walk willingly into the cage. I wiped the fake tears from my eyes. They thought they were coming to a coronation. They had no idea they were coming to an execution. I put the car in gear and drove home to tell Dante to get his best suit ready. The show was about to begin. The moment my mother disconnected the call, the atmosphere inside the Highland Drive estate shifted from funeral somber to festival bright. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly what happened next. I knew their patterns as well as I knew my own heartbeat. Beatrice would have let out a triumphant sigh declaring that her prayers had moved mountains, while Brad would have immediately reached for the most expensive bottle of scotch in my father's cabinet, a bottle he had been eyeing for years, but never dared to open until he felt he truly owned the place. Brad poured 3 fingers of the amber liquid and toasted the air, his arrogance swelling to fill the room. I told you, he said, leaning back in my father's leather armchair with a smirk that could curdle milk. I told you that girl is a coward. She talks big, but she has no spine. All it took was a little pressure, a little reminder of who holds the power, and she folded. He took a satisfied sip, believing he had just masterminded the financial coup of the century. In his mind, he was no longer a desperate gambler in debt to the mob. He was the savior of the Brooks legacy, the genius who had wrestled control from the weak sister. Bianca, meanwhile, was not concerned with the finances. She was concerned with the optics. She immediately began scrolling through designer rental apps on her phone. I need something dramatic for tomorrow night, she announced, ignoring the fact that they were technically bankrupt. I need a dress that says benevolent saint, but also undeniably rich. Do you think white is too much? It symbolizes purity and forgiveness. It will make Aaliyah look even darker in comparison when she apologizes to me. She patted her silicone belly, adjusting the strap that was digging into her lower back. Beatrice was already on the phone, but she was not calling a therapist or a priest. She was calling the guest list. The intimate family dinner I had requested was rapidly expanding into a gala event. Beatrice did not just want an apology, she wanted a coronation. She called Councilman Davis. She called the bishop. She called the board members of the charity foundation. You simply must come to Le Cavalier tomorrow night, she cooed into the receiver, her voice dripping with false humility. Aaliyah is finally making things right. We are having a ceremony of reconciliation. It will be a beautiful testament to the power of family values. They were not inviting guests to a dinner. They were selling tickets to my public execution. They wanted the entire upper crust of Seattle's black elite to witness the moment the rebellious daughter bent the knee to the golden child. They wanted witnesses to seal the transfer of power so that I could never take it back. They laughed, they drank, and they planned their victory speeches completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing in a house they no longer owned. Drinking liquor, they could not afford celebrating a victory over a woman who was currently printing out their arrest warrants. Brad clinked his glass against Bianca's mocktail. To the winners, he grinned. Le Cavalier was silent when we arrived, the stillness of the private Versailles room broken only by the soft clink of crystal as the staff set the table for 12. I had rented the most exclusive space in the city, a room usually reserved for diplomatic meetings and wedding proposals. Tonight it would host a funeral for my family's reputation. Dante moved with the precision of a bomb technician. He bypassed the restaurant's standard audio-visual system, hooking his military-grade laptop directly into the room's massive projector screen. He taped the cables down under the Persian rug, ensuring that once the show started, no one could pull the plug the way Bianca had pulled mine. I stood by the window watching the valet stand below while checking the final details of my guest list. The first of my special surprises arrived at 6:30. Dr. Richard Evans walked in looking nervous but determined. He was the premier obstetrician in Seattle, a man whose waiting list was 6 months long. He was also the man Bianca had stiffed for $3,000 in consultation fees before she realized he would not perform illegal fat removal procedures on a fake pregnancy. I walked over and shook his hand. "Thank you for coming, doctor. Your check is in the envelope on the side table." Dr. Evans nodded, adjusting his glasses. "I am not just here for the money, Mrs. Brooks. I took an oath to do no harm. What your sister is doing is a mockery of medicine." I placed him in the small alcove behind the heavy velvet curtains, usually reserved for a string quartet. Tonight he would be the soloist who sang the song of truth. Next came the heavy artillery. Agent Vance from the FBI Financial Crimes Division did not come through the front door. He and his team entered through the service entrance, guided by the manager I had tipped generously. They were not wearing their raid jackets yet. Dressed in dark suits, they looked like somber waiters or private security. I set them up in the adjoining wine cellar, which had a direct line of sight into the dining room through a one-way glass panel. Dante set up a live audio feed so they could hear every word Brad said. They needed a confession to make the charges stick without a long trial, and I was about to serve them one on a silver platter. "Everything is green," Dante whispered, sliding his phone into his pocket. "The trap is primed." I looked at the long mahogany table. I had placed name cards at every seat with deliberate care. Beatrice was at the head, of course, to stroke her ego. Brad was to her right, Bianca was to her left. And me, I placed my card all the way at the foot of the table, the position of the supplicant, the outcast. It was exactly where they wanted me. It was the seat of the defeated. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and sat in my designated chair. My hands were steady. My heart rate was 60 beats per minute. I checked the small remote control hidden in the folds of my napkin. I was not the scared girl in the hospital bed anymore. I was the executioner, and I was just waiting for the condemned to take their seats. The heavy double doors of the Versailles rooms swung open, admitting a steady stream of Seattle's elite. It was a parade of silk velvet and diamonds, a gathering of the people who controlled the city's social pulse. My mother had outdone herself. She had summoned everyone who mattered. The bishop arrived, his purple vestments flashing under the crystal chandeliers. Councilman Davis walked in shaking hands, with the practiced grip of a politician looking for donors. Uncle Marcus and Auntie Sarah arrived together, their faces set in expressions of solemn judgment as they glanced toward the foot of the table where I sat. Beatrice was the centerpiece of the spectacle. She wore a floor-length gown of shimmering gold sequins, a dress that screamed old money. I knew exactly where she had bought it. She had picked it up from Neiman Marcus this morning, charging $6,000 to a credit card that was exactly 1 day away from being frozen. But tonight, she did not look like a woman on the brink of bankruptcy. She looked like a queen holding court. She glided from guest to guest, accepting air kisses and murmuring thanks. "Thank you for coming to support us," I heard her say to the bishop. "It has been a difficult week, but the Lord has humbled Aaliyah's heart. We are just so grateful she decided to do the right thing before she caused any more damage." She was painting the narrative with every breath, cementing my role as the villain who had finally seen the light. I watched her from my exiled seat, feeling a strange sense of detachment. In the past, her performance would have crushed me. Tonight, it was just evidence. Once the guests were seated, the waiters poured the champagne. It was Dom Perignon, another expense they could not afford. Brad stood up at the head of the table. He tapped a silver spoon against the crystal flute, the sharp chime silencing the room. He adjusted his jacket, puffing out his chest. He looked every inch the successful patriarch he was pretending to be. "Family." Brad began, his voice booming with a false warmth that made my skin crawl. "We live in a world that is often cynical, a world that forgets the foundational values that built this community: loyalty, trust, and most importantly, forgiveness." He paused for effect, letting his gaze sweep over the room before landing heavily on me. "We all know that recent events have tested the Brooks family. There has been confusion. There has been sickness. There has been jealousy. But we are not here to dwell on the darkness. We are here to celebrate the light. We are here because Aaliyah has bravely chosen to step down from a burden she could not carry. She has chosen to put the financial security of this family into hands that can protect it." A ripple of polite applause went through the room. Bianca, sitting next to him, looked down at her fake belly and smiled a shy, persecuted smile. Brad raised his glass higher. "So let us drink to order being restored. Let us drink to the wisdom of knowing one's place. To the Brooks legacy." "To the legacy," the room echoed. I raised my water glass, my face a mask of calm submission. I watched Brad drain his champagne, savoring the taste of his victory. He thought he was toasting to his future. He had no idea he was drinking to his demise. The waiters began to serve the appetizers, but I knew the main course was going to be something much colder and much harder to swallow. The leather portfolio slid across the mahogany table like a tombstone sliding into place. Brad uncapped his fountain pen, the same one my father used to sign the deeds to his first properties, and held it out to me with a smug, expectant grin. The room was silent, save for the soft clinking of silverware against china, as the waiters froze in the shadows, sensing the tension. I reached for the pen, my fingers inches from the gold barrel, ready to play my part in this farce. Wait. Bianca's voice cut through the air, sharp and dissonant. She did not look at me. She was looking at her reflection in her spoon, adjusting a stray lock of hair. Brad frowned, his hands still extended. "What is it, honey?" he asked, trying to keep the momentum going. "We are right at the finish line." Bianca looked up, her eyes wide and wet with fresh manufactured tears. She placed a protective hand over the silicone mound beneath her white dress, stroking it as if soothing a startled animal. "It is not enough, Brad," she sniffled, looking around the room to ensure every eye was fixed on her performance. "Signing a piece of paper does not erase the trauma. Do you know what my blood pressure was this morning? Do you know that I woke up screaming because I dreamt she was unplugging my baby's life support?" Beatrice leaned in her face, etched with concern. "Oh, my poor angel, it is okay. She is signing it away. She can never hurt you again." Bianca shook her head, a single tear tracking perfectly down her cheek. "No, Mom. It is not about the money. It is about respect. She humiliated me in that hospital. She made me look like a criminal, and now she gets to just sign a paper and eat steak." She turned her gaze on me. The sadness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard malice that made my blood run cold. "I want an apology," Bianca said, her voice gaining strength. "A real one. I want you to get down on your knees, Aaliyah. Right here, in front of the bishop, in front of Uncle Marcus. I want you to kneel and beg my unborn son for forgiveness. I want you to admit that you are jealous, broken, and unworthy of being in this family." A gasp rippled through the room. Even Brad looked uncomfortable. Kneeling was not in the script. It was medieval. It was a demand for total abject submission. Brad started lowering his voice. "Maybe that is a bit much." Beatrice cut him off. Her eyes were locked on me, shining with a fanatical light. "Number, she is right. Humility is the path to grace. If Aaliyah is truly repentant, she will have no problem humbling herself before the sister she wronged. Do it, Aaliyah. Kneel." The command hung in the air. I looked around the table. Uncle Marcus looked away, swirling his wine. The bishop adjusted his collar, refusing to meet my eyes. They were all complicit. They were all waiting for the black sheep to be slaughtered so they could enjoy their dinner in peace. I looked at Bianca. She was smirking, a tiny, almost imperceptible curl of her lip that screamed victory. She thought she had broken me. She thought that threatening to withhold her forgiveness would bring me to my knees. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood against the floor was loud, sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I walked around the end of the table until I was standing directly in front of Bianca. I looked down at her, then at the floor. The carpet was plush and red. I took a breath, letting my shoulders slump, letting them see the defeat they so desperately craved. I bent my knees, lowering my body toward the ground, as the entire room held its breath, waiting for the final snap of my spine. I bent my knees, lowering my body inch by inch. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the rapid, excited breathing of my sister. Bianca leaned forward, her eyes glittering with a predatory hunger, drinking in the sight of my apparent surrender. My mother clasped her hands together in a prayerful pose, ready to weep tears of performative joy at the return of her prodigal broken daughter. Brad uncapped his pen with a flourish, smugly preparing to sign away my life's work. They all saw a woman about to break. But my knees never touched the floor. At the last possible second, my hands swept under the hem of the heavy damask tablecloth. My fingers closed around the cold, hard plastic of the remote control I had taped to the table leg hours before the guests arrived. It was a movement so fluid, so calculated, that for a heartbeat no one understood what had happened. I gripped the device, feeling the batteries inside shift like the loading of a weapon. Then I stood up. I did not rise like a defeated invalid. I rose like a titan. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back and shedding the skin of the weak, sickly sister I had worn for 32 years. The transformation was instant and terrifying. The air in the room shifted from the heavy humidity of judgment to the sharp, brittle tension of impending violence. Bianca's smirk faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching as confusion clouded her eyes. Beatrice lowered her lace handkerchief, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing?" Beatrice hissed, her voice losing its sugary sweetness. "I told you to kneel. Finish it." I looked at my mother, and for the first time in my life, the cord was cut. I felt no fear, no longing, no desperate need for her approval. I looked at her and saw only a stranger in a stolen dress. "I am done kneeling, Mother," I said, my voice projecting clear and steady to the back of the room, ensuring the FBI agents behind the glass heard every syllable. "And I am certainly done apologizing for crimes I did not commit. You wanted a public testimony. You invited the bishop, the councilman, and half of Seattle to witness the truth about this family. Well, who am I to deny you?" I raised the remote control, holding it up for the entire room to see. Brad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Sit down, Aaliyah," he barked, pointing the pen at me like a knife. "Stop this theatrics right now and sign the papers. You are embarrassing yourself." I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp expression that promised scorched earth. "No, Brad, I am just getting started." Bianca asked for a gift. She wanted a grand gesture to prove my devotion. So I have prepared one. I turned to face the stunned guests. "My sister says I have a bad memory. She says I hallucinated in the hospital. She says she is a victim. So I think it is only fair that we all refresh our memories together. Let's see exactly what happened in room 304. I pointed the remote at the massive white wall behind the head of the table. "What is this?" Bianca whispered, her hand flying to her throat. I pressed the red button. The motorized projection screen descended from the ceiling with a low mechanical hum that sounded ominously like the closing of a prison gate. The crystal chandelier dimmed automatically, plunging the room into a twilight shadow. A beam of blue light cut through the darkness, hitting the screen with blinding clarity. "Sit down and watch," I commanded. "And do not blink. You might miss the part where the golden child becomes a murderer." The giant screen flickered to life, the high-definition image sharp and unforgiving. It was a bird's-eye view of ICU room 304. The timestamp in the corner confirmed the date, just 4 days ago. The room was silent, but the speakers overhead crackled with the sterile hum of hospital machinery. Then the door on the screen opened. Bianca walked in. The real Bianca, not the tearful victim sitting at the table. On screen, she checked her phone, checked the hallway, and walked to the bedside. The clarity of the audio was devastating. "You are such a burden, Aaliyah," the digital Bianca hissed. In the dining room, the real Bianca let out a strangled gasp. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "Turn it off! Turn it off right now! That is fake! That is a deep fake!" I did not lower the remote. I turned the volume up. On screen, Bianca leaned close to my unconscious form. $5 million, Aaliyah. Do you have any idea what that kind of money could do for me?" The guests at the table were frozen. The bishop's fork hovered halfway to his mouth. Councilman Davis looked from the screen to Brad with dawning horror. This wasn't just a family dispute, it was a felony being broadcast in surround sound. Then came the moment that sucked the air out of the room. On the screen, Bianca reached out. Her hand wrapped around the power cord. There was no hesitation, no shaking, just cold, calculated malice. She pulled. The monitor on the video went flat, emitting that piercing, continuous tone of death. "Chet D. de Tau Latien. Da so. I can get the money," Bianca whispered on the recording. The silence that followed in the banquet hall was deafening. It was a silence so heavy it felt like physical pressure. Crash. The sound came from the head of the table. Beatrice had dropped her crystal wine glass. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain dripping onto her gold-sequined lap. She did not move to wipe it up. She stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, her face draining of all color. The image of her golden child, her perfect angel trying to murder her other daughter, was looped on the screen, playing the moment of the plug pull over and over again. Bianca looked around the room, her eyes wild. She saw the disgust on the faces of her friends. She saw the judgment in the eyes of the church elders. There was no way to spin this. There was no way to cry her way out of a video where she literally narrated her motive. "It is out of context," Bianca shrieked, her voice cracking. "She told me to do it. She begged me. It was assisted suicide." Brad slammed his hand on the table. "Shut up, Bianca. Just shut up." He knew. He looked at the one-way mirror of the wine cellar, realizing too late why the service staff had been so attentive, why the room felt so secure. He realized the trap had snapped shut, and his leg was caught in the steel teeth. I pressed pause on the remote, leaving the image of Bianca holding the cord frozen on the screen behind me. "Assisted suicide?" I asked calmly. "That is interesting, because according to the audio I was in a coma. But please, Bianca, tell us more about how I begged you to kill me for $5 million. Beatrice stood up, her hands shaking so hard her bracelets rattled. "Aaliyah, stop this. Turn it off. We can discuss this at home." I looked at my mother. "Home?" I asked. "Which home, Mother? The one you think you own, or the one Brad just lost?" I pressed the next button on the remote. The video vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet. It was time for the second blow. The screen went black, plunging the room back into the dim glow of the crystal chandeliers. But the silence that followed was heavier than the darkness. Bianca sat paralyzed, her face a mask of crumbling plaster. The video evidence of her murder attempt was damning enough to send her to prison, but I wasn't finished. I wasn't just here to prove a crime. I was here to dismantle a myth. I turned back to the table, my gaze locking onto the one thing Bianca was using to shield herself from judgment: her pregnancy. "You know, Bianca," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "I might have believed the assisted suicide story. Maybe the jury would too. After all, stress makes people do crazy things, especially the stress of carrying the first male heir of the Brooks dynasty." Beatrice nodded frantically, latching onto the lifeline. "Yes, exactly. She is hormonal. She is not herself." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Hormonal. That is funny, because I brought someone here tonight who has a very different medical opinion." I gestured to the curtained alcove. Dr. Evans stepped out. The room gasped. Everyone recognized him. He was the fertility specialist to the stars. Bianca's eyes bulged. She shrank back in her chair, clutching her stomach with both hands, but this time the gesture looked less like protection and more like hiding evidence. Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses and looked directly at the councilman. "I am sorry to interrupt your dinner, but as a medical professional, I cannot stand by and watch this charade. Miss Bianca Brooks came to my clinic 3 years ago. She requested a tubal ligation. I performed the procedure myself. It was successful and permanent." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Beatrice turned slowly to look at her golden child. "You—" "What?" she whispered. Dr. Evans continued, his voice clinical and devastating. "Furthermore, Miss Brooks visited a med spa yesterday for laser liposuction, a procedure no pregnant woman would ever survive without harming the fetus. There is no baby, Mrs. Brooks. There never was." "Liar!" Bianca screamed, jumping up. "He is lying! Aaliyah paid him to say that. My baby is real. I can feel him kicking right now." I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the stack of photos. I threw them onto the table. They fanned out like a winning poker hand. Bianca doing shots of tequila. Bianca smoking a cigarette. and the pièce de résistance Bianca in the parking garage holding her own stomach in her hands. The guests leaned in. The bishop picked up a photo of the silicone prosthetic sitting on the passenger seat of the Range Rover. He dropped it as if it were burning hot. Bianca looked around frantic. She grabbed a steak knife from the table not to attack, but to defend her lie. "Stay back," she hissed. "Do not touch me." I walked toward her. I did not stop until I was standing inches away. "Drop the act, Bianca," I said. Or should I say drop the prop? She swung the knife wildly, but she was shaking too hard. In her panic, she stumbled back against her chair. The strap of the prosthetic, which had been digging into her back all night, finally gave way. With a soft, humiliating thud, the silicone belly slipped out from under her dress and landed on the Persian rug. The sound was small, but it echoed like a cannon blast. Bianca looked down at the plastic lump on the floor. Then she looked up at our mother. The game was over. The air was plastic. The murder was real. And the silence in the room was finally broken by the sound of sirens approaching from the street below. The room was still reeling from the hollow thud of silicone against the floor when Brad made his move. He did not rush to his wife's aid. He did not try to cover her shame with his jacket. Instead, he buttoned his blazer with trembling fingers and turned to the guests, his face a mask of faux outrage. He was sweating a sheen of panic glistening on his forehead under the chandelier lights. "This is clearly a mental breakdown," he announced, his voice tight and pitching too high. "Aaliyah has lost her mind and she is dragging Bianca down with her. We are leaving." Meeting adjourned. He reached for the door handle, desperate to escape before the spotlight turned on him. "Sit down, Brad," I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a whip. "You did not think I forgot about you, did you? Bianca was just the distraction. You are the mastermind." I pressed the remote again. The image of the fake belly vanished, replaced by a chaotic web of red lines and negative numbers projected onto the 10-foot screen. It was the master ledger of the Brooks Family Trust. The spreadsheet was complex, but the bottom line was simple enough for a child to understand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the room, gesturing to the screen. "Brad has been telling you for years that he is a financial genius. He claims he doubled the family fortune. But math does not lie." I pointed to the final column. "The balance is 0. A collective gasp went through the room. Beatrice looked up from her wine-stained lap, her eyes unfocused and glassy. "0, she whispered the word barely escaping her lips. "That is impossible. We have millions." "You had millions, Mother," I corrected. "Until Brad discovered cryptocurrency." I scrolled down the page. The guests watched in horror as the transactions flashed by. $2 million lost in a week on a speculative coin. 500,000 transferred to an offshore betting site in Costa Rica. 300,000 withdrawn in cash at ATMs near the casino district. He did not invest in blue-chip stocks. I continued walking toward Brad, who was now backed against the door by the sheer weight of the evidence. He bet the family legacy on digital dogs and football games. And he lost. Every single dime. Brad's face was gray. "These are fabricated," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "This is slander. I will sue you for every penny you have." "Is it?" I asked. "Then explain this." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen filled with a scanned document. It was the loan agreement with Vane Holdings. The interest rate was predatory. The collateral was listed clearly. The Brooks estate. "You owe $500,000 to a loan shark." "Brad," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "That is why you needed my life insurance. You were not grieving for me. You were waiting for my payout to save your kneecaps because Silas Vane gave you until the end of the month to pay up." Beatrice let out a low wail, realizing that the luxury she was sitting in was an illusion. The bishop shook his head, placing his napkin on the table, as if the very air around Brad was contaminated. I stood directly in front of him, looking into his terrified, sweaty face. The man who had sneered at me for years, who had called me useless, was now reduced to nothing more than a frightened criminal. "Stop pretending, Brad," I said, my voice cold and low. "You are not a businessman. You are a fraud. You are a con artist in a rented suit, and your debt has finally come due." Brad opened his mouth to launch another denial, to spin another web of lies about hacked accounts and corporate espionage, but the sound that left his throat was drowned out by the heavy thud of the service doors swinging open. The illusion of a private family dinner shattered instantly. The men who stepped into the room were not waiters. They were not private security. They wore navy blue windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters that sucked the remaining oxygen out of the Versailles room: FBI. Agent Vance led the charge, his face grim and professional. He did not look at the stunned guests or the sobbing matriarch. He walked in a straight line toward the head of the table, flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the Seattle Police Department. The dinner guests scrambled back, overturning chairs in their haste to distance themselves from the blast radius. "Bradley Miller," Agent Vance said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a gavel. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." Brad stumbled back, hitting the wall. "You cannot do this here. This is a private party. Do you know who I am? I demand to call the police commissioner." Vance did not blink. He grabbed Brad's wrist, twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed off the vaulted ceiling, a sound more final than any judge's ruling. "We know exactly who you are," Mr. Miller, Vance replied, tightening the cuffs until Brad winced. "You are a man who stole $4 million from a charitable trust and laundered it through offshore accounts to pay illegal gambling debts. We have the bank records, we have the IP addresses, and thanks to your sister-in-law, we have your confession on tape. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." While the federal agents hauled a kicking and screaming Brad toward the exit, the 2 uniformed officers turned their attention to the heap of white fabric on the floor. Bianca was still huddled on the rug next to her silicone stomach, her makeup smeared across her face in a grotesque mask of terror. She looked up, seeing the badge on the officer's chest, and scrambled backward on her hands and knees like a trapped animal. "No," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is the crazy one. She is the one you want. I am pregnant. You cannot arrest a pregnant woman." The female officer reached down, her grip ironclad, as she hauled Bianca to her feet. The silicone prop lay abandoned on the carpet, a silent witness to her lies. "Bianca Brooks," the officer said, her tone devoid of sympathy. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Aaliyah Brooks. We have video evidence of you tampering with life support equipment with malicious intent." Bianca began to thrash her heels, slipping on the polished wood. "It was a prank. It was just a joke. I did not mean it. Mom, help me, make them stop." She looked toward Beatrice, begging for the protection she had relied on her entire life. But Beatrice did not move. My mother sat frozen at the head of the table, wine dripping from her dress, staring blankly at the empty chair where her favorite son-in-law had just been sitting. She watched as the police dragged her golden child out of the room. Bianca's screams fading down the hallway until they were cut off by the closing of the heavy elevator doors. I stood alone in the center of the room, untouched by the chaos. The room was empty of my tormentors, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and the lingering echo of justice. I looked at Agent Vance, who gave me a curt nod before following his suspect out. The show was over. The house of cards had not just fallen, it had been incinerated. The heavy brass doors of the elevator clicked shut, sealing my sister and her husband inside a steel cage that was rapidly descending toward a squad car. The silence that followed was broken only by the frantic clicking sound of high heels skidding across the parquet floor. Beatrice ran to the elevator, slapping her palms against the closed metal doors, as if she could pry them open with sheer will. "Bianca," she screamed, her voice raw and unrecognizable. "Come back! Don't take her. She is fragile." She pressed the call button repeatedly, her manicured nails tapping a frantic rhythm against the brass. But the light above the door showed the numbers dropping. 4, 3, 2. Gone. Beatrice stood there for a moment, her chest heaving, her gold-sequined dress now stained with wine and sweat. Then slowly she turned. She did not look at the stunned guests who were huddled in the corners, whispering behind their hands. She did not look at the bishop who was hurriedly putting on his coat to escape the scandal. She looked at me. Her face, usually a mask of composed elegance, was twisted into a rictus of pure hatred. She marched toward me, her eyes bulging, looking less like a mother and more like a vengeful spirit. She stopped inches from my face, the smell of expensive perfume and stale alcohol rolling off her in waves. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. I stood my ground, my hands clasped calmly in front of me. "I did what was necessary. You monster!" Beatrice screamed, raising her hand as if to strike me, though she stopped when Dante stepped forward from the shadows, his presence a silent warning. "You have destroyed this family. You have ruined everything. Look at what you did. You sent your own sister to jail. You humiliated your brother-in-law. You dragged our name through the mud in front of the entire city." She grabbed the lapels of my jacket, shaking me with a strength born of desperation. "Tell them to stop," she commanded, her eyes wide and pleading. "Call them right now. Tell the officers it was a mistake. Tell them you gave Bianca permission to pull the plug. Tell them Brad has the money. You can fix this, Aaliyah. You have always been the smart one. Fix it." I looked down at her hands clutching my clothes. For 32 years I had waited for her to touch me with affection. I had waited for her to protect me. But she was only touching me now because she needed a shield to protect the people who had tried to kill me. Even now, with the truth projected on a 10-foot screen, she did not care that I had almost died. She only cared that Bianca had been caught. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my jacket. I stepped back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional chasm between us. "I did not destroy this family, Mother," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "You did. You destroyed it when you taught Bianca that she was above the law. You destroyed it when you let Brad gamble away Dad's legacy. And you destroyed it the moment you decided that my life was worth less than your reputation." Beatrice stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process the rejection. "But I am your mother," she whispered, playing her final card. "You owe me." I shook my head slowly. "I owe you nothing. The bank, however, is a different story. You might want to check your mail, Beatrice. I believe the eviction notice is coming tomorrow." She recoiled as if I had slapped her. I turned my back on her for the final time, signaling to Dante that we were leaving. Behind me, I heard her collapse into a chair, sobbing, not for her lost daughter, but for her lost kingdom. The reign of Queen Beatrice was over. Beatrice sat slumped in the velvet chair, her weeping reducing to jagged, shallow breaths. She looked small, a withered queen stripped of her court. She refused to look at the guests who were now hurriedly collecting their coats, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Brooks family implosion. She only looked at the empty doorway where her golden children had been dragged away in handcuffs. I reached into the leather portfolio one last time. There was a single document left inside. It was not a thick file like the others. It was just 2 pages stapled together bearing the official seal of the King County Recorder's Office. I walked over to the table and placed it gently in front of her, right next to the puddle of spilled wine. "Read it," I said softly. Beatrice wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. She glanced at the paper, her eyes struggling to focus. "What is this?" "More lies. More tricks. It is a foreclosure notice, Mother," I explained, my voice devoid of pity. Or rather, it was. She froze. "Foreclosure. We do not have a mortgage. Your father paid off the house 20 years ago. Brad took out a second mortgage 6 months ago." I said, delivering the truth with the precision of a surgeon. "He forged your signature. He needed liquidity to cover his crypto losses, and he used your home as his personal piggy bank. He stopped paying the installments 3 months ago. Beatrice grabbed the paper, her hands trembling so violently the page rattled. She scanned the legal jargon, her breath hitching as she saw the amounts. $700,000. Default. Auction. The bank was scheduled to auction off the estate next Friday, I continued. The sheriff was going to come to the door with an eviction order. You were going to be thrown out on the street with nothing but the clothes on your back. Brad hid the notices. He was hoping to win the money back before you found out. But he lost. Beatrice dropped the paper, looking up at me with a glimmer of hope. But you said it was a notice. Does that mean... Did you fix it? Aaliyah, did you pay it off? She reached for my hand, her eyes desperate. I knew you would not let them take the house. I knew you still loved me. Thank you. Thank you for saving us. I did not pull my hand away. I let her hold it, let her feel the warmth of the daughter she had discarded just so the chill would be colder when I spoke. I did not pay it off for you, Beatrice. She frowned, confusion clouding her eyes. What? I stepped back, breaking the contact. I called Mr. Henderson at the bank this morning. I did not pay the mortgage to clear the debt. I purchased the note. I bought the debt from the bank. I pointed to the line at the bottom of the document. Read the assignee mother. It does not say First National Bank anymore. It says Nemesis LLC. That is my holding company. I leaned in close, ensuring she heard every word. The bank does not own the house anymore. Brad does not own the house. You certainly do not own the house. I do. I am the mortgage holder. I am the landlord. And you, Beatrice, are a tenant who is 3 months behind on rent. The color drained from her face completely. She looked around the opulent room, then back at me, realizing the absolute shift in power. The daughter she had threatened to disown now held the keys to the only sanctuary she had left. You can't, she whispered. You wouldn't put your own mother on the street. I picked up my purse and signaled to Dante. The eviction moratorium ends tomorrow at noon, I said, turning to walk away. I suggest you start packing. The locks are being changed at 1. You cannot mean that, Beatrice stammered, clutching the edge of the table as if the floor had suddenly tilted beneath her feet. Her eyes darted around the empty banquet hall, searching for an audience that was no longer there to pity her. This is my home, Aaliyah. I have lived there for 30 years. Your father built that house for me. It is the seat of this family. You cannot just kick me out like a common squatter. I watched her struggle to comprehend the reality of her position. Even now, stripped of her money, her golden child, and her dignity, she still believed she was untouchable. She still believed that the title of mother granted her immunity from consequences. I stepped closer, my voice devoid of the anger that had fueled me earlier. Now there was only cold, hard business. You have 24 hours, Beatrice. The movers I hired will arrive at noon tomorrow to catalog the furniture and assets listed in the foreclosure inventory. You may take your clothes, your personal toiletries, and any jewelry that was not purchased with the stolen trust fund money. Everything else belongs to Nemesis, LLC. If you are not off the premises by 1 o'clock, the sheriff deputies will escort you out for trespassing. Beatrice let out a strangled sob, dropping to her knees on the wine-stained carpet. She grabbed the hem of my dress, burying her face in the fabric. Please, she wailed, her voice thick with desperation. Where will I go? I have no money. Brad lost everything. I cannot live on the street. I am a respected woman in this community. What will the church say? What will the neighbors think? I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. It was pathetic. She was not crying because she had lost her daughters. She was crying because she was worried about what the neighbors would think. Her vanity was the only thing stronger than her grief. I pulled my dress from her grasp, stepping back. You should have thought about your reputation before you helped cover up a murder attempt, I said. As for the house, do not worry. It will be put to good use. I am not keeping it. I have no desire to live in a mausoleum of bad memories. I paused, letting the final blow land with precision. I am selling the estate, Mother. every single brick. And I am donating 100% of the proceeds to the cardiac care unit at Seattle General Hospital. Beatrice froze, looking up at me through a mask of running mascara. You are giving my house away. I am turning it into a grant for patients who cannot afford heart surgery, I corrected her. We are going to call it the Brooks Heart Foundation. It seems fitting, do not you think? Finally, that house will be used to help people with actual hearts instead of sheltering people who have none. The realization shattered her. The house was her identity. It was the physical proof of her status. To know that it would be sold, dismantled, and the money given to the very sick people she had looked down upon was a torture worse than prison. She let out a guttural scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated loss, and collapsed completely onto the floor. She curled into a ball, sobbing uncontrollably, mourning the death of her ego. I did not look back. I took Dante's arm and we walked out of the Versailles room, leaving Beatrice alone in the wreckage of her own making. We walked through the lobby, past the stunned valet, and out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear. For the first time in my life, I took a breath that did not hurt. I was an orphan by choice, and I had never felt more alive. The holding cell at King County Jail smelled of stale urine, industrial bleach, and the sharp metallic tang of fear. Brad Miller, still wearing his tuxedo from the dinner, looked like a peacock thrown into a pit of pit bulls. The expensive wool of his jacket was wrinkled, and his bow tie hung loose around his neck like a noose. He gripped the steel bars with manicured hands, screaming at the indifferent guards stationed down the hall. "I demand to speak to the warden," Brad shouted, his voice cracking. "This is a mistake. I am a personal friend of the hospital director. You cannot keep me in here with these animals. I have rights." A low, raspy chuckle came from the concrete bench behind him. Brad spun around. A man the size of a vending machine was sitting there, peeling an orange with dirty fingernails, a spiderweb tattoo stretched across his neck. He looked at Brad with amused contempt. "Sit down, prom king," the inmate rumbled. "You are giving me a headache." Brad sneered, his arrogance overriding his survival instinct. "Do not talk to me. I am not like you. I am a finance executive. I manage millions of dollars, and when my lawyer gets here, I am going to have you transferred to solitary for harassment. Now move over. That bench is the only clean spot in this hellhole." Brad took a step forward, expecting the man to yield to his authority. Instead, the inmate stood up. He towered over Brad, blocking out the harsh fluorescent light. He reached out and grabbed the lapels of Brad's $3,000 dinner jacket. With a seamless motion, he shoved Brad backward. Brad tripped over his own dress shoes and landed hard on the cold, sticky concrete floor. The cell erupted in laughter. Brad scrambled back, hyperventilating, wiping the filth from his hands onto his pants. "Nice suit," the inmate sneered, sitting back down. "But in here, you are just fresh meat. Keep your mouth shut, or I will take the shoes too." Across the complex in the women's processing unit, the humiliation was less violent, but equally stripping. Bianca stood shivering on a rubber mat, her arms wrapped around her chest. The white designer dress lay in a heap on the floor, discarded like trash. The officer, a woman with eyes like flint, held a plastic bag open. "Earrings," the officer barked. Bianca fumbled with the diamond studs, her fingers trembling. "Please be careful. Those are vintage. They cost more than your annual salary." The officer snatched them and dropped them into the bag with a dismissive clatter. "Necklace, watch, ring." Bianca hesitated at the ring. It was a family heirloom Beatrice had given her. It was the symbol of her status as the favorite. "I said the ring," the officer snapped. Bianca pulled it off, a sob escaping her throat. "This is illegal. I am pregnant. I need special accommodations. I need my vitamins." The officer looked at her, then glanced at the report on the counter. The report that listed the evidence seized at the scene: one silicone prosthetic stomach. "Cut the act." "Brooks," the officer said coldly. "We know about the prop. Here, put this on." She threw a bundle of orange fabric at Bianca. It was coarse, smelling of strong detergent and stained with the sweat of previous inmates. Bianca held it up with 2 fingers, looking at it with horror. "I cannot wear this. It is polyester. I am allergic to synthetic fabrics. I need my silk robe. Put it on, or you go to the cell naked, the officer said, turning her back. 10 minutes later, Bianca was sitting in a holding cell, wearing the ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. It bagged around her waist, highlighting the absence of the pregnancy she had faked for months. She gripped the payphone receiver, her knuckles white. She dialed the family lawyer. Voicemail. She dialed Beatrice. Voicemail. She dialed Brad. Disconnected. She slammed the receiver against the wall, screaming until her throat was raw. I want my lawyer, I am Bianca Brooks. You cannot do this to me. But the only answer was the heavy metallic clang of the cell door sliding shut, locking her into a world where her name meant absolutely nothing. She slid down the wall to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and for the first time in her life, she was truly, utterly invisible. The jagged skyline of Seattle was just a silhouette in the distance, a reminder of a life that felt like it belonged to a different person. 3 months had passed since the night of the dinner party, and the seasons had shifted from the gray oppression of constant rain to the vibrant golden warmth of early summer. I stood on the sprawling redwood deck of our new home in Medina, looking out over the glittering surface of Lake Washington. This house was nothing like the mausoleum I grew up in. There were no heavy velvet curtains, no dark corners, and no secrets. It was all floor-to-ceiling glass, clean lines, and open spaces that invited the light to touch every inch of our lives. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and fresh water. My lungs expanded fully, without a hitch, without pain. The heavy fluid was gone. The heart monitor was gone. The constant crushing anxiety that had defined my existence for years had evaporated, replaced by a serenity I was still learning to trust. I felt strong. My skin had regained its color, and the hollows beneath my eyes were filled in. Dante walked up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. He smelled of sawdust and coffee. He had designed this place himself, pouring his love into the architecture, building a fortress of peace where no one could ever hurt us again. "They are here," he whispered, pressing a kiss to my temple. I turned just as a bright yellow sedan crunched up the gravel driveway. The door flew open and Nurse Higgins stepped out. She looked younger, lighter. She was not wearing the drab scrubs or the heavy trench coat she wore during our clandestine meetings. She wore a floral sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, carrying a large ceramic dish covered in foil. She did not knock. She walked right up the steps and pulled me into a hug that threatened to crack my ribs. It was a hug that smelled of vanilla and comfort, the kind of embrace Beatrice had never been capable of giving. "Look at you," Higgins said, pulling back to cup my face in her hands. "You have color in your cheeks. You look like you have gained 10 pounds. I laughed, wiping a happy tear from my eye. "It is the lack of poison in my life, Higgins. It does wonders for the appetite." We sat on the patio for hours eating the lasagna Higgins had made from scratch. We laughed until our sides ached, talking about everything and nothing. We did not talk about trials or lawyers or prison sentences. We talked about Dante's new architectural contract. We talked about the garden I was planting. We talked about Higgins's retirement plans, which I had fully funded as a thank you gift the day the trust fund was legally transferred to my name. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of violet and orange, I looked across the table at them. Dante, my protector. Higgins, my savior. They were my people. "You know," Higgins said, pouring the last of the iced tea, "I never had children of my own. I always thought it was a regret. But seeing you sitting here healthy and free makes me realize I just had to wait for the right daughter to find me." I reached across the table and took her hand. Beatrice had given me life, but she had also tried to take it away. Higgins had saved it. And as the stars began to blink into existence above our new home, I finally understood the truth. Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins. It is about who stays to hold your hand when the darkness comes. And for the first time in 32 years, I was home. The laughter drifted out from the kitchen, a warm and melodic sound that mixed with the chirping of the crickets in the garden. Dante and Higgins were debating the best way to grow tomatoes in the Pacific Northwest climate. It was a mundane, beautiful conversation, the kind of normal life I had watched from the sidelines for decades, but never thought I would get to play a starring role in. I left them there for a moment, stepping to the edge of the balcony, where the glass railing separated me from the drop into the dark velvet night. I looked at my reflection in the glass. For the first time, I did not see the ghost of a sick girl. I did not see the disappointment of the Brooks dynasty. I saw a woman who had walked through the fire and refused to burn. I turned slowly, looking past the lights of my house, past the trees, and directly into the lens of my own soul. If I could speak to the person I was 6 months ago, or to anyone standing on the precipice of a betrayal that feels too big to survive, I would tell them this. They say blood is thicker than water. It is the oldest lie told to keep victims silent. We are taught that DNA is a binding contract, an unshakable debt that can never be fully repaid. I spent my entire life paying interest on that debt, bankrupting my own happiness to buy the love of people who viewed me as nothing more than an insurance policy. I thought that leaving them would kill me. I thought that without the structure of that family, however toxic, I would collapse. But I learned a hard lesson in that hospital room. In medicine, when a part of the body turns black, when the cells die and the rot sets in, you do not keep it. You do not pray for it to heal. You do not cover it with bandages and pretend it is healthy. You amputate, you sever the connection to save the host. It is a violent act. It leaves a scar that will ache when it rains. But it is the absolute only way to ensure the infection does not reach the heart. My mother, my sister, my brother-in-law, they were the necrosis of my life. They were the gangrene that was slowly eating away at my spirit long before they tried to stop my heart. Cutting them off was not an act of cruelty. It was a surgical necessity. It was the moment I chose to live. Some might look at my life now and see what I have lost. They see the empty chairs at the holiday table. They see the fractured lineage. They see a woman who sued her own kin. But they are looking at the scar, not the survival. I turned back toward the warmth of the kitchen where the two people who actually loved me were waiting. I had lost a mother who valued reputation over life. I had lost a sister who valued money over loyalty. But in the silence of their absence, I heard my own voice for the first time. I lost a family, yes. But I found the one person I had been searching for all along. I found myself, and that is a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. The end. The most profound lesson from Aaliyah's journey is that biology is not a binding contract for abuse. We are often raised with the belief that we must endure toxicity simply because it shares our last name, but loyalty without reciprocity is just servitude. Aaliyah proves that saving yourself sometimes requires the painful but necessary act of amputation, cutting off the people who rot your spirit to preserve your own life. You are not a bad person for choosing your mental health over a family image. You are not broken for refusing to be a victim. True family is not found in a birth certificate. It is found in the people who stand by you when you have nothing left to offer but your presence. Aaliyah's victory wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about reclaiming the agency to define who earns a place in her life. Never apologize for removing yourself from a table where respect is not being served. If you believe in the power of choosing your own family and protecting your peace, type "I choose me" in the comments and share this story with someone who needs the courage to break free.